It's been my pleasure to become friends and really get to know Jose Angel over the last years. He's one of our former students. He's written some books, as you probably know from seeing his biography. And for me, I have a special love for Jose because he's such a library lover, and his story about spending time in our library and finding an intellectual kind of kinship with the ideas and people that live in libraries, the real people and also the people in the books, I think, is a story that I love. But Jose's working on his PhD at the University of Illinois. You're in Champaign now, Jose?
I currently live in Urbana, but I'm finishing my PhD at the Chicago campus.
Oh, I see. Okay. And he's a world-renowned author, and I think the thing that's most significant for me to say is that he's really become a national voice about undocumented people in our country, and the lack of acceptance, and also just the economic realities. The story that we hear in the media isn't the story that most people live, and I think that's been the most powerful thing that he has taught me through his writing and through the talks that he's given. So that's probably enough of an intro. Jose, I'll turn it over to you. I keep looking at the camera, but wherever to look. I'll turn it over to you, Jose.
Do I want to say?
Yeah. Oh, and Amy's going to say one thing.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing really quick. Very nice to meet you. I know I haven't I don't know if you can even see me.
Yeah, come back over.
Come here. I know I haven't met you in person, but where am I?
Right here.
No, you're right here.
We can't see you.
Okay, there you go. Hi. I haven't met you in person, but this is a social psychology class, the Psych 202 class. So a lot of the topics that we've covered and that we'll be covering related to how people kind of come to their beliefs about the world and how people see other people. We've talked about culture, gender. We'll be talking about aggression and kind of looking at persuasion, the political climate. So a lot of the questions that you'll probably be getting will be related to probably some to yourself personally, but also maybe to some of the topics that we've covered in the class.
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay.
I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So, first of all, thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak to you directly. As Troy said, I'm a former student of Marine Valley. I think I attended from 1998 to 2000, and I was back in campus just recently, like about a year ago or so. But I've been a couple of times. I've been back on campus a couple of times, and I absolutely love it. I absolutely love it. To me, Marine Valley was like the first step in this really, really long journey into higher education, which I'm about to finish hopefully by the end of the year or the beginning of next year when I get my PhD. And just being able to have access to a classroom like the one where you're sitting at right now changed my life forever. Because coming from the place where I'm coming from, it was never been possible. The social circumstances, my economic background, and my family history didn't allow for something like this to be possible. I was the first person to ever go on to even high school in the entire history of my family. So by being able to attend Marine Valley, it was a real game changer for me. And it really changed my perspective of life and my place in society, what I had come to this country to do. I had come looking for riches really, but then as Troy said, I found something else. I found access to books, to libraries, to schools like this. So that completely changed everything that I believed, my value system, the way that I related to people, the way that I understood what my place in society was. So that's sort of like, just a little bit of the background of where I'm coming from. So just to tell you a little bit more about myself, I came from Mexico in 1993. So that's about, 26 years now, right? I've probably been in the States longer than many of you have been alive. So and the situation in which I find myself is still the same. Think about that for a second. You know, over a quarter of a century spent in a condition like this, through no fault of my own other than being born in a certain place, at a certain time, you know, in a certain society, and you know, all of that define who I will be, or partially define what I will be, you know, because growing up, I'm not sure if you got a chance to read a piece that I sent to you for, you know, for you to read, Negative Growth. I kind of lay out all of the, you know, some of the challenges and the aspirations that people like myself had back in Mexico when I was growing up back in the 1980s or so. You know, we had this expectation that when you grow up, you will inevitably go to the US because that's where everyone went. We never went anywhere else. That is a place that we went to, and I grew up with this belief since a very early age that I will have to do that, you know, and it was just part of life. And to me, it became my rite of passage. At age 19, when I first came to the States and I crossed the border, you know, but I didn't understand as I do now, you know, all the injustices and all the economic disparity and all the animosity and all the politics behind the moment, this political juncture that we live at this very moment, and the gross misunderstandings that people have about people like myself, you know. So I came to the US when I was 19, as I said. I arrived in Chicago, worked a whole bunch of different jobs, menial jobs, you know, factory. I worked on 111th Street at a Mexican restaurant that you may see at some point for many, many years, and at the same time that I attended Moraine Valley. So before that, I had gone to ESL classes at South Urban College, GED. I got my GED because people in my family told me, well, no, you are going to ESL classes. You might as well get your GED. And I said, okay, what is that? And then they explained to me that the GED was this thing that you got after taking an exam, you know. I'm like, okay, so what do I have to do? And you have to study. And then that was corroborated when I went to ESL classes, and they told me, you know, if you want to take your GED, you can come to class or you can do it independently. So I started thinking about the possibilities that I will have, you know, by being part of this society. And they told me, okay, so if you take this test, you're gonna be able to have this wonderful job, you know, after you finish your degree. I was thinking in terms that I never imagined before when I first came from Mexico. I left school when I was about 12 years old because of the economic circumstances of my family without finishing what we call in Mexico secundaria, which is really like 8th, 9th grade here in the American system. So for me to think about even attending high school, that was already, you know, something daring of my part, but so I tried. They gave me a book to read, which I kind of read. I didn't really understand much, and then I went and presented my test, and I failed. I said, "Well, that's what you get for thinking that you're Mr. You know, smart." But then I said, "Well, you know what? I'm already doing this, why don't I do it again?" So I went and took it again and failed it again. I didn't pass it until the third time. So I'm simply saying this to let you know that, you know, that can illustrate, you know, that persevering in whatever goal that you impose on yourself pays off, you know, but there's gotta be this kind of perseverance. But even then, after going to, you know, through all the ordeal with the GED and ESL and all that, I finished it, and guess what? Nobody came knocking at my door telling me, we're gonna give you a job, we're gonna give you a better job, we're gonna give you an office job. Nothing happened. I kept going to the same restaurant where I had worked for many years, washing dishes every night, and nobody came around to give me a raise or anything. One time they just took me out into the dining room and said, okay, well, you're gonna work here now as a busboy. And that's when I started sort of like getting familiar with American culture and with kids, pretty much like your own, but who went to different places and to college. And they kept coming back every year. I worked at this restaurant for about 10 years, so I knew a few of them when they came back for the summer, and they worked alongside with me, right? And the idea of going to college never really, occurred to me, because that's not what I had come here to do. I had come to the U.S. to get on my knees and scrub toilets. That's what I came here to do. But then, I had gone to ESL classes, I learned English, I got my GED, and then working along these kids who were coming back for the summer, I had this epiphany at that moment that, those kids, they weren't really becoming geniuses by any means. So I was like, if they can do something like going to college, so can I. So that's when I decided to attend Moraine Valley, and it changed my life forever. It gave me this different perspective. I never made any friends at Moraine Valley. I don't have this, social network of former classmates or anything. But as Troy said, I made friends with all the people in the bookshelves, and they completely changed all the way that I view the world and the way that I relate to it. And that's given me, that library that you have at Moraine Valley has given me this voice that I have now and this perspective, and it's giving me a chance to take it nationally and to speak to national audiences about this very problem that we have in this society right now, where you have 11 million people, living in limbo. And we talk about this country as always a democracy. We talk about, Donald Trump is ruining our democracy. Democracy for many people does not exist. For many people, for 11 million people who can vote, this democracy looks more like a caste system. That's the way it certainly looks like to me. So, this piece that I sent to you, I wanted to share with you because, what I was trying to work out in that specific essay that I wrote were all the different psychological pressures that people like myself, and not only people like myself, but people on the other side of the fence also feel, So when you are in a position like mine, in a situation like mine, there are certain pressures that you experience. But then the other people, who think differently, who are on the other extreme of the political spectrum, they feel this antagonism, this perpetual antagonism for people like myself, and that can't be good. I'm sure what I was trying to do is I was trying to understand what sort of psychological pressures they were also feeling, because it can't be good to always feel anger, for people who live in right next to you in the same community as you. So that's sort of the problem that I was sort of like trying to address on that article, and I wanted to see if you guys had a chance to read it and if you had any questions for me.
Okay. Anybody want to start? You first?
I can.
Okay.
Hi, very nice to meet you, first of all. I would like to say that I can relate a lot to what I read a little bit of your book. I do wish that I had read this a lot sooner, I was undocumented as well. I came to this country about 15 years, and I have been attending Moraine Valley for almost 8 years, just part-time and working part-time, working full-time, just to help my family, as you know. So one of the things that I've struggled has been not being in that limbo that you mentioned of pursuing education and not having all the access as others do. And I guess my question is, how did you find confidence to pursue and continue, even though we have all these obstacles, being illegal at times? I mean, I'm under the DACA now, which has been so amazing, and I'm currently working on my immigration, but it still was always kind of like a setback. How did you find that confidence and just to keep going and to go on and write about your story, if that makes sense?
Yeah, well, that is a really good question, and I think I found myself after graduating from UIC. I transferred immediately from Moraine Valley to UIC to pursue a bachelor's in philosophy. And right after, because I knew I wasn't going to be able to do anything with a bachelor's in philosophy, nothing if I didn't go into a PhD program, that is. I finished also, I went into and finished a master's in Latin American literature. So with me, everything has been upside down since the very beginning, because when I entered Moraine Valley, I entered having a very low degree of formal education, because my formal education had been interrupted when I was 12 years old. I'm in Mexico, and I've been studying in Mexico in a different language, learning a whole different culture, right? So to me, it was two different universes. And I learned more about European culture, and I learned more about American culture by going to Moraine Valley. So I knew more about the European experience and the American experience when I graduated with a bachelor's degree in philosophy. And then only learn about my own Latin American background when I started my master's degree. So what happened after finishing a master's degree at UIC in Latin American literature is that I found myself thinking about this very issue that you just mentioned. How do you keep going, right? But I thought I had no choice. I always saw it as it was my one chance in life, for me to get an education. And when I went to Moraine Valley, I thought I was gonna, have this chance to do something good with my education. And I never got the advice I should have gotten, maybe. But that was a good thing for me in my particular case, because that left me free to make my own decisions. And I decided to study philosophy. So years later, into the future, when I graduated with a master's degree, I knew full well that I was in a very particular position. I was in a very particular position because I was an educated man, I was undocumented, and I had all this really solid background in the humanities. At the same time that my humanity was being degraded, by the very condition of being undocumented. So I found myself amidst this paradoxical kind of situation, and the more I thought about it, the more it became to me sort of a moral imperative to do something about it. I didn't know what. I knew I liked books because I fell in love with them when I went to Morgan Valley, and I knew that I could, if I wanted, I could write because it didn't seem that complicated to me. I had been focusing on that because I didn't have a lot of a lot of friends because I was focusing on my studies and work. So I said, well, you know what, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna write a book that speaks to this very issue because other people are not speaking about it. They're not speaking about the undocumented from the perspective of the undocumented. It's always from the perspective of the media, the politicians, or, who knows, or academia. But it was never coming from the perspective of the undocumented themselves. So it's like there's all these discourse going on in society about a particular group of people, a very large group of people, right? That excludes all those people. So I'm like, this is nonsensical. It doesn't make any sense for people not to be able to express their own point of view on a problem that affects them directly, right? So that's sort of what kept me going and keeps me going on a daily basis, and also the fact that I believe that I'm in this particular situation, and I convinced myself that I need to do something about it, because I know that nobody else has my point of view, like the same way that nobody else has your point of view or any of you's point of view, because we're all particular, we're all individuals, and we all see the world differently. We experience it differently from different perspectives. We are part of one society, but we experience it differently. So that's sort of, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, knowing who you are and what, being persuaded about the things that you need to do, being convinced about your one goal that you want to pursue in life. I think that's what it comes down to me.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Yes.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Hi there, my name's Tony. Firstly, I'd like to say I can appreciate your point of view, giving your point of view out there for people, because like you said, I mean, I don't believe in almost anything the media says, even though I know there might be some truth to it. Just it's all skewed to a sense. So I appreciate that you're able to do what you're doing for a large group of people that don't speak out. I also understand that there are many benefits to undocumented or illegal immigrants coming to America. There are many benefits that I'm sure people don't know or people don't realize. But as a devil's advocate, I'd like to ask you, so as I'm sure you can understand, if someone were to illegally, if someone were to enter a different country, like let's say North Korea, illegally, the chances of them being put to death is pretty big, because that's just the country they are. Or maybe if it's not them, there are countries like that. And so as I'm sure you understand, America isn't one of those countries. So I know that, or I couldn't begin to know that the process for coming into this country and getting the legalization and everything, I'm sure it's incredibly taxing and tough and difficult. But do you believe, would you say that it's important to keep in mind that the process could be much worse, and it's important to remember that it's important to remember that I guess that it could be, it could be a lot worse, and just to keep that in mind, that America isn't as bad as some other countries. And I'm not sure how I'm, trying to ask this question, but.
No, I think I understand what you're trying to say, and I appreciate your question. You're right, there are regimes which are a lot more cruel than America is. However, at the same time, America has been founded on this idea that is morally superior to all other nations in the world, and that it's got this tradition of, being built by immigrants. The very idea of America itself is built on immigration, is it not? Like,
Absolutely.
with the pilgrims and then the move of the pioneers into the West. So yes, the process should be easier. So, but I wanted to first speak to another point that you made before, that I think that you said there are benefits to undocumented immigrants coming to the States. First of all, I think we need to clarify that, because I don't think anybody, I'm telling you as a person who's been undocumented for over 26 years, nobody wants to be in this position. No one. So if there was a process whereby everybody could, line up, get their papers, get to work, and be able to just be a regular citizen or a resident alien, whatever, legally, everybody will do it. But the problem is that this country has been designed to have a large population working for it, in this sort of like shallow economy, or shallow existence rather. It's not a shallow economy, it's the same economy that we all participate in. But it's this sort of like shallow existence whereby, people are kind of induced to come and give their work, and then are discarded after years or decades of working and giving their, contributing their taxes and whatnot. So the problem is that gradually this idea of a welcoming America has been degraded, right? Beginning, it's a very long history, long in the, when we talk about generations, like there's been, the Chinese were excluded, the Japanese were excluded, the Irish were excluded, the Italians were excluded, the Mexicans, now the Central Americans are excluded. So, there's a whole history of this kind of exclusion, right? So it has never been easy, but it has never been worse than this very moment that we're living right now. Does that make sense?
Yes.
There have been different difficulties and challenges, throughout history, but the moment that we're living right now is unheard of. Like the wall that exists within Mexico, between Mexico and the U.S., it wasn't there before. It wasn't always there. That's an artificial border that people created. They started building this border after, 1990 or something, 1980s, whatever. It hasn't always existed. The U.S. hasn't always existed. It's this kind of empire that's been expanded, right? Expanding and taking over lands that didn't belong to people who just decided one day that we're gonna expand shining sea to shining sea. And then, we're gonna take over the lands that belong to other people, we're gonna kick them out, we're gonna build a wall, now let them pass to what used to be their former home. So that's been making things increasingly difficult for people to move around. And when you ask many people, like, when people hear about the idea of open borders, usually the people who oppose it is the people who have, open borders. People who can travel anywhere, who can go to Europe or, Asia or Africa, who can travel the world without any problems. I think what we're seeing right now is sort of like the control on the mobility of brown bodies specifically. People controlling who can travel and who cannot travel, and in which direction. So everything was okay when a certain group of people were moving west in the U.S., to places like Texas and Arizona and New Mexico, but now that people are coming south to north, that's not okay. So that, it is a very complicated story that I invite each one of you as responsible citizens of this country and of this community that you will be when you finish your careers, to think about these issues, because they're gonna affect you whether or not you want it. I mean, the psychological pressure that's gonna put on you, the kind of moral decisions that you're gonna have to make, they're gonna depend on the way that you think about these issues. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
Hi, hello,
Yes.
my name's Maureen. So going along with that kind of topic, it's more about the psychology of that. How do you think, like, with the current political stances and Trump, like, constantly screaming about building the wall and all of that, how do you think that's affecting, like, younger immigrants and children, and even, like, the people that are currently held at those camps?
I'm not sure, but I think it must be terrible, right? I mean, for people to think about the small children, right? Think about the small children, the ideas they have, they have all these fantasies in their heads, and they think about the world as being, I don't know, we see it very differently as adults. But when they have this idea of, if you are a child growing in a poor village in, say, Honduras, in the mountains of Honduras, and you see images on TV that tell you about Disney World and Mickey Mouse and all this fantasy world in the United States, and people who have traveled and stayed there, and live there, and then come back and see you, what do you think the expectation of this child is going to be, right? That one day they're going to be able to travel and be there and witness this fantastic kingdom, right? Be part of it, or at least see it. But instead of that, what's happening. I mean, how they travel. I'm not sure if you guys have been able to ever read the kind of journey they have to endure. And we're talking about people just from Honduras, just for argument's sake. Honduras is the next country south of Mexico. So they have to go through Mexico on a train that's called the Beast, and they go on top of it. And children who can who can stand still for more than a few minutes at a time, they have to travel on top of the train. This is a freight train. They have to travel on top of it many times, with their parents. They have to go through Mexico, which, because of the war on drugs at the moment, is experiencing levels of violence unheard of before in the country. And so sometimes their parents get kidnapped, their mothers get raped, the children get also kidnapped and beaten, and sometimes they're recruited by the narcos, to be part of their ongoing business. So it is a nightmare just going through Mexico and then getting at the border when they think they can, easily cross it and then go on to arrive at this fantastical place that they have imagined. They're put in cages instead, and they're separated from their parents. I've heard stories, and I've heard the reports of children crying like, being frantic. And I've read the reports from psychologists saying that this is gonna have, long-term effects on the psychology of the children, because, the children are not meant to be put in cages. Nobody is. So, I can only imagine it. I have never been there. Some people that I know have, and they tell me that conditions are terrible. The sanitary conditions are terrible, and we know that children have that also, right? In detention. So I think it is terrible, it's horrible. I don't know what the future is, and what the future has in store for those children. But I mean, I'm sure they're gonna be traumatized by this experience, and that's something that we all should think about. I mean, you as a psychologist in training, you should keep this in mind, because those are children that might be around your community. You never know. If they were able to cross the border, and they might be in your community, in classes with your own nieces or nephews, right? So those are things that we have to keep in mind, I think. But I think the conditions are just as bad as they can be. Yes.
So my question was, so when I think of the issue, so I think of it as, well, I'm from Mexican descent, others from Latin descent, people who are here, and how can, so it feels like our countries, our native countries, are sort of a sinking ship, if you will, and people leaving is sort of like taking cups and kind of pouring out, right? Maybe some people make it through, some people don't make it at all. There are terrible things that happen along the way. How do we that are here, being educated, how do we fix those problems at home so that these native countries can become prosperous and change, right, to where the idea of in Mexico that immediately, like, you're going to have to leave. How do we change it to, well, now I'm going to stay here and I'm going to go to university here and I'll be successful here, if that's possible.
Right. So I think, in my particular case, what changed my perspective. I mean, I'm not successful by any means. I write, and I think about these issues, and this is what I sort of do. And I live very modestly. By no means, I'm rich whatsoever. I mean, I live very modestly, but this is what has become important for me, right? It's become a moral imperative, as I said, but only because I have had access to classrooms like this, to higher education. But, the problem is that not everybody does. I didn't have it when I was in Mexico, and only certain people do have it. Right now, I am writing my dissertation for my PhD is precisely on the topic of Mexican literature in Chicago. Mexican literature written in Spanish in Chicago. And one of the things that I have found in my research is that many of the writers who are currently writing in Chicago in Spanish of Mexican descent, rather who are Mexican themselves, have become writers by virtue of having access to these public spaces in Chicago, in the US. Many of them haven't gone to college, but they've had access to public libraries where they have acquired all this knowledge and these techniques of writing that have really transformed their lives. That, like, the library at Marine Valley transformed mine as well. So having access to education is extremely important. I mean, I think that's the foundation of every country in the world. That's what's made the difference in the United States to begin with, because it's been, I think, over 100 years ago when they instituted high school for, it was a requirement, it became a requirement for the general population, I think. But it wasn't really the general population, it was white males who were, who had the chance to go and get their high school diploma, or African Americans were excluded, obviously. I think women might have been excluded as well, I'm not entirely sure. But what I'm trying to say is that when you don't have access to education, I mean, it's very difficult. It's extremely difficult for people to have this sort of like aspiration to change anything in the system. And I think this is why, the Mexican government has been reluctant to open its higher education, its universities to general population, because if you have an educated population, what happens? They start demanding their own rights, right? And what happens when they demand rights? The whole powerhouse of the government shakes, right? Like it did back in 1968. If you don't know about 1968 in Mexico, there were protests in Mexico City during the Olympic Games that happened in Mexico City in 1968, and there was a massacre. There was a massacre by the Mexican army of Mexicans for fighting for their own rights and a more democratic society. At the end of the massacre, over 500 people were dead in the streets of Mexico. And it was students, most of them students, university students were killed. So this is what happens when people demand their own rights, the rights that they deserve. So that is the change. That is the change that we're talking about. But there are places like where I come from, Guadalajara, Jalisco. There's a person in charge of the whole higher education system, the university system in Jalisco. His name is Raúl Padilla, and now he's in charge of that. I mean, he's like the mafia boss of the education system within that state, and he controls even the largest, which is the largest book fair in the whole Spanish-speaking world, La Feria Internacional del Libro de Guadalajara. That's like, there isn't anything larger in the whole, we're talking about Spain, Colombia, Argentina, you name it. It's the largest one, and everyone, all the Nobel Prizes, all the Nobel winners, they go there and speak. But he's got control of all the university system within the states, and he captures all the different resources that come from the federal government, and the access to people like yourselves into high school is not guaranteed, not even guaranteed for high school, let alone for college. So those are the challenges that we need to tackle if we want to make a change. How do we do that? That's a question, for somebody way smarter than me.
Thank you. And I also,
Yeah.
I wanted to, while I was listening to your audio reading, I really enjoyed where you were talking the philosophy of the point between the plates, and I just wanted to thank you for that. That was really good.
Yeah, thank you.
Maria? Hi, my name is Maria, and I wanted you to know that I did buy your book, and I wish you could be here so you could sign it. Okay.
There we go. So
Okay.
next time I'm at Marine Valley, I'll do that for you, Maria.
Yes, okay. I just wanted to thank you I did read your article about negative growth, and I loved about the article that you were able to write about history in the article to let us know a little bit about the history in Texas. So I love that you bring history into this so we can learn more about why we are in the situation we are right now. And I also wanted to let you know that you really inspire people like me. For example, this is my third semester here at Moraine, and English is my second language. So I really felt I wasn't gonna be able to make it, not even one semester here. So this is my third semester and I'm still here, so I'm very proud of that. And you made it through here, so it makes me feel good that I can make it too. So, and I also watched some of your videos also, and I remember seeing you telling the audience that you came here and you discovered books. And I feel the same way because I also come from an extremely poor community in Mexico where I didn't have an education, and I came to the United States and how to learn English, and reading books and learning, discovering new things really helps a person grow. And I just want to thank you for making me feel that I'm not alone and that you inspire other people. And my main question is, has anything changed in your immigration status with your family? Since I was watching your videos and you were saying that there's still not a solution for you to become documented. Are you still in the same situation?
All right. First of all, Maria, I want to say that I'm very proud of you. Very, very proud that you have made it through your third semester at Moraine Valley. That school again changed my life forever, and I'm so glad that you have the same experiences as me, and that you become involved with reading and books and whatnot. Secondly, I want to say that you said that I managed to incorporate history into this article that I wrote, and I want you all, each one of you, honestly, I want each one of you, you take nothing else from this talk today. I want each one of you to think of yourselves as history makers, because you are. Each one of you has a very particular point of view and a role to play in society that no one else has. No one else has. So, by virtue of that, you are history makers. But and you have to think about this. This is not something that I said lightly. I think all of us, think about it as a tower. If a tower, if one of the bricks falls, then the entire tower, kind of wiggles and it will collapse at some point. This is the problem with society many times, that we don't understand our place in it. There's this wonderful author whom I love, Ralph Waldo Emerson, who talks about this specific topic. Like, we have to come together as a community. We want to heal. We want to find, we need to find our place in society, right? So that's sort of what I wanted to say regarding the comment that you made, Maria, and history. I think we all are history makers. We just need to realize it. And lastly, my immigration status remains the same, and and it gets only more complicated. But at the same time, it gives me a chance to talk to you about issues like this, right? And I want you also to think critically about this issue, because it's not Republican made. It is politicians in the U.S., both Democrats and Republicans. This whole mess started back with Bill Clinton and George Bush. So it's not only the one side of the aisle who's responsible for this situation, that 11 million people. Think about it, 11 million people, that's the size of Illinois. I mean, the whole state will disappear, and that's the 11 million people. 11 million undocumented immigrants in the U.S. is a third of the size of Canada. Think about the magnitude of the number. Anyway, so you're all history makers, and I hope that you really think about those issues. Your place in society when you walk out of this classroom, and take it very seriously and start conversations. Because I think this is the only way that we can change perceptions, by having honest conversations with each other. But I think it's probably about time for us to end, because you probably have to get to a different class.
Yeah.
I thank you. I appreciate your time today.
Thank